Drug companies say there'll be enough doses to vaccinate most of the world against COVID by the end of the year. Industrialized nations are way ahead, but out of the 1.5 billion shots given so far, only 0.3% has gone to the globe's poorest countries. Barriers are plentiful. Vaccines are fiddly to make and challenging to transport. Then there are the politics and money. Experts warn it's bad for everyone if only a fraction of us are protected.
Well, many developing countries are still waiting for vaccines promised by the COVAX donation program. China gave 200,000 doses to Chad this month, the first vaccine to reach the country, where officials are trying to fight the pandemic with limited testing and treatment capabilities. DW's West Africa correspondent Fred Mavunyi reports.
At last, Chad has a weapon against the pandemic. Sinopharm vaccines for at least 100,000 people. Not much for a population of 16 million, but it's something. This is the country's main testing facility in the Only Proper Hospital. They have been fighting the coronavirus almost blind. The COVID-19 situation was scary at the beginning. We tested patients who came to hospital and some of them tested positive. Some of the health workers and other patients died of COVID-19. Official figures show less than 5,000 infections and fewer than 200 COVID-19 deaths. The real numbers are almost certainly higher as testing and healthcare infrastructure is so poor. That creek infrastructure and political instability left Chad near the bottom of the list for international vaccine help. Until last week, when the COVID-19 task force got supplies from China.
Quand on a reçu le vaccin Sinopharm,
when we received Sinopharm vaccines, it was really a great joy for us.
Un plaisir pour nous d'avoir reçu ce vaccin-là.
Health workers, pilgrims going to Mecca, and patients with pre-existing conditions are a priority. Officials know the Chinese donation can only be the first step. These fridges are ready for vaccines yet to come. Under the COVAX program, we will get doses that will vaccinate at least 20% of the population of Chad. Only a few come for vaccines. Many are skeptical of its origins. If we had the means to get other vaccines, we could. But if we don't have the means, and this can protect us. Just because it's a Chinese vaccine doesn't mean it's bad. Sinopharm vaccine doesn't yet have European or US approval, but the World Health Organization says it offers up to 79% protection. In Chad, people are used to taking what they can get.
Elizabeth Masuta is from Doctors Without Borders. Nice to see you again. That report made one thing very clear, that vaccine distribution is totally unequal. What's the main problem in your opinion?
I think the main problem is that the distribution through COVAX, as it was originally planned, so that COVAX could be an international distribution mechanism, then was undermined by bilateral deals that were made by the US, by the UK, also the European Union, and they basically bought up the vaccine market. So there was little left over for COVAX to actually distribute to poorer countries. And now, with the stop of exportations from India and the heavily reliance of the COVAX mechanism on the supply from the Serum Institute of India, we see this as a great problem, and therefore there are not many vaccines left over. And in the report, it said by the end of the year, 20% of Chadians will be able to be vaccinated through COVAX. That is probably a number that can't be reached at the rate that COVAX is going.
So COVAX doesn't work, does it?
It does work in the sense that it does supply vaccines to the poorer countries. What it does not reach its goals that it has set itself. So it was supposed to, by June this year, reach 3.3 of the percent of the populations, but it has only reached 25% of this. And as I said, till the end of the year, COVAX was supposed to supply 2 billion doses of vaccines. It looks like now only half of that number will be reached.
Production is obviously a problem, as we've mentioned. A few days ago, though, the European Parliament called for a temporary waiver of patents, which would allow poorer countries to produce their own vaccines. How hopeful are you that that will finally happen?
We've seen now in talks and announcements that there are more, that companies will be more open or supposed to be more open for also more voluntary licensing deals and for technology transfer. We hope that this can happen fast. Studies have shown that within 6 months, technology transfer can happen also for mRNA-based vaccines. So we urge countries, but also companies, to quickly tech transfer so that we can have a scale-up of production, because as we see, the distribution is unequal, and when we have more production worldwide, we will have less dependencies on a few producers that we have at the moment.
But Elizabeth, these pharma giants aren't just going to give up their technology for free, are they?
Well, they have received billions of dollars in taxpayer funding and public funding. So I think at this point it would be key to share the technology that has been also developed, as in the case with mRNA, also with public funding. So it's something that we're saying in this case, there have already been profits made by companies like Pfizer and BioNTech, like Moderna. They have made profits already, and now it's time in this global pandemic to share the technology, share the patents, or actually lift the patents so that there can be a scale-up of production, because as we've seen, we are not managing to reach the goals that we wanted to reach, and people in poor countries are waiting for their vaccines.
So governments need to put pressure on these companies. I mean, it was governments that did these deals with these companies and gave these companies our taxpayer money. Why don't they see the problem here?
I think we see a little bit of a divide between the rhetorics and the words being used and saying the pandemic will end only when it ends for everybody. I think the awareness is there for that. But I think a little bit the numbers and the actions divide from that a little bit, because we've seen now the past weekend, the G7 have donated vaccines, but it's not enough. They've announced 870 million doses. The WHO has responded and said, thank you, that is a good effort, but actually we need 11 billion doses. So we see there is a divide in the action. And also with the voluntary licenses, yes, there are deals being made, but not enough for the global demand that we are seeing.
You mentioned the tech transfer that has to happen, the licensing problem. There's also the export ban problem, India being such a big producer. What needs to change there?
I think all these hindrances, all these barriers for more global production and global distribution needs to be worked on, and they need to be lifted, because there's no such thing as only the patent barrier needs to be lifted, only the export ban needs to be lifted. There needs to be a combined effort of all these things. There needs to be a waiving of patents, export bans, and a sharing of technology and know-how. Only then will we have a fast scale up and more vaccines for people worldwide faster.
Elizabeth Masuta from Doctors Without Borders, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Time for your questions on the coronavirus. Over to our science correspondent, Derek Williams.
A friend refuses to get a vaccine because he believes fetal tissue was used in their development. Is this true?
This topic is a really tricky one to talk about, and there's plenty of room for ethical debate. But I want to just focus as much as possible on the science. First of all, let's get one associated social media rumor out of the way. COVID-19 vaccines do not contain fetal cells or fetal DNA. Those are not components or active ingredients in any vaccine. However, what are known as fetal cell lines have been used or are being used in different ways for the development and sometimes the production of various vaccines. A fetal cell line is a line of cells that was established in the past from an electively aborted fetus that can be propagated in the lab practically indefinitely. The cell lines used for COVID-19 vaccine production and development were first isolated many decades ago. Now, that these cell lines have been used as tools in the development of COVID-19 vaccines should not, in and of itself, come as much of a surprise to anybody. Fetal cell lines have been used for well over half a century to develop and produce a wide range of vaccines for other diseases, from hepatitis to chickenpox. And those vaccines have prevented a huge amount of suffering and death. Critics of methods that employ fetal cell lines say that more should be done to promote alternative systems. Proponents, on the other hand, argue that other systems are less effective. Leaders from the world's major religions are, of course, divided on the complex question of whether or not vaccines made with the help of fetal cell lines are morally and ethically acceptable. But many of those leaders, while ambivalent about such vaccines, have also not prescribed them.
And Japanese companies are helping out with the country's sluggish vaccination drive ahead of the Olympics. The head of software firm SoftBank has been showing the vaccinations minister around his company's own vaccination centre in Tokyo. SoftBank says it'll set up 15 others like it, and not just for employees. So far, only 13% of Japanese population has received a shot. Tokyo is under a state of emergency just weeks before the Games are set to begin. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.